you know that 90 to 100% of autistic children and teens are diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, or SPD? My name is Dr. Lisa Marnell. I'm an occupational therapist on the faculty at Boston University. I have about 20 years of experience working with autistic children and teens. In today's video, I'm going to describe sensory processing disorder. I'm going to share some of the research into the prevalence of SPD among autistic children and teens. And then I'm going to tell you about how important it is that therapists, psychologists, parents, and teachers understand and have knowledge about sensory processing disorder so that we can support and advocate for our children. We all have sensory preferences, and that means that we may be irritated by the sound of a sudden unexpected noise, or we may not like the feel of goopy substances like slime or playing with Play-Doh. But when a child has sensory processing disorder, that means that his neurological reactivity to sensory input is so severe that it negatively impacts his ability to function. Every day, kids process sensory information from the world around them, from inside their bodies. Let's take a deeper look at this incoming sensory input. External sensory input consists of sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touch. The internal sensory input is a little more complex. These consist of proprioception, which is a child's body sense and force modulation, vestibular, which is a child's balance and movement, and interoception, which reflects internal body sensations, such as the feelings of hunger or thirst. On the right, you can see that a child may be over-responsive or under-responsive to any of these input. There is an increased prevalence of SPD in autism. This is noted both in the research and in the day-to-day experiences of those of us who are on the spectrum, as well as among people who work with autistic individuals. Let's see what the research shows. Only 5 to 13% of neurotypical or typically developing kindergarten students presented with SPD. However, sensory processing challenges were noted in up to 95% of autistic children in the 2008 study. And there was a meta-analysis review of 14 studies, and this showed significant sensory processing differences between autistic and neurotypical students. Finally, sensory processing abnormalities were noted in 94% of autistic adults, and this suggests that sensory processing disorder persists into adulthood. Let's take a look at the presentation of the sensory processing disorder in autism, and what I mean by that is what exactly are the characteristics or the traits that we might note in autistic children and adults. Sensory processing challenges are varied among all children with autism and include over and under responsiveness to all of the 8 sensory systems. Autistic children may be overly responsive to sensory input and overly responsive to taste and to smell in particular. Behaviors that were noted as more common in autistic children are tactile seeking, rubbing objects, flicking fingers, movement seeking, rocking and jumping, visual avoidance, and auditory under-responsiveness, such as a low responsiveness to verbal input. Why is it important for us to understand an autistic child's sensory processing? This is because SPD could negatively impact social participation, academics, motor planning, coordination, daily living skills, emotional regulation, and participation in sensory experiences. The next step is for us to understand the link between sensory processing and behavior. In fact, At times, we need to be sensory detectives to better understand children. We can look at some examples. Example 1, on a wet spring day, a child arrives at school and has several verbal outbursts and throws a pencil at another student. We need to do detective work. If this is a child who's sensitive to lights, visual clutter, and messy tactile input, we could step back and think, well, what could be triggering these behaviors? And a possibility that we could come up with is this question: did the child get wet on the way to school? Does he have damp socks? This may trigger a fight, flight, or freeze reaction, that reactivity that we see when a child has sensory processing disorder. How about we look at another example? It is pie day at school, and students brought pies to school to share and to celebrate. One student won't join the group to eat. So let's do our detective work and think about the child's sensory profile. This is a student who has taste aversions and avoids certain foods. So let's think of some possibilities. Is the child overwhelmed and put off by the sickly, sweet smell of the pies? This may trigger a fight, flight, or freeze reaction because of his oversensitivity to perhaps smells. So one of the first and most important things to do is to refer a child to occupational therapy to support his or her sensory processing. A second suggestion is to modify a child's environment based on his or her sensory profile. Some strategies could be employed, such as offering different seating options, adjusting the child's placement in the classroom, providing sensory breaks, and reducing excessive classroom noises. Now, a third recommendation is something we touched on before, and that is to be a detective and to consider behaviors from a sensory perspective. So we could monitor a child's sensory over and under responsiveness in the regular day-to-day in order to understand the child further. And we learn about a child as we observe them, and we should always try to speak to them. So asking them, how do loud noises make you feel? How does the sound of the radiator kicking on make you feel? Increasing their self-awareness will just help them to be able to manage their own sensory needs as they get older. All right, a fourth suggestion is to incorporate enjoyable sensory experiences into a child's day at home and at school. Offering rich and rewarding sensory experiences can be calming and regulating to kids. For instance, if a child enjoys smelling objects, it may be very relaxing for them if we set up a smelling center with varied spices and scents so that he can go to that part of a classroom or even in his bedroom, in a corner of his bedroom, to just be able to have those enjoyable sensory experiences that make him feel good. And a final suggestion is to advocate for children and communicate their sensory processing needs. It's important for us to think proactively about sensory processing and to support autistic children and teens. I hope that you found this video informative. I want to share that I'm developing a free masterclass. This is a training for you to show you how to incorporate sensory supports into the daily lives of autistic children and teens. The objective is to increase their engagement in daily life at home and at school, and to promote joy and quality of life. In the box below this video, you'll find a link to my website, and you sign up there and you'll receive a notification when the course is completed. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe to my channel, Kids Master Skills. And thank you so much.